officers and ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to West Devon's Development Management Team meeting, committee meeting rather, on Tuesday the 19th of April. I think then what date it was. Okay. I'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping just while we make sure the IT is all up and running properly. Because we have got members of the public in as well, I'll just advise that while we're not expecting a fire drill, but in the event the fire alarm does go off, please make your way downstairs and out of the building to the far end of the car park. The fire marshal is Mrs. Hall, who is sat right at the end there, so follow her, please do. Just to also let you know that the meeting is being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. And so make sure, committee members, if you can make sure, and officers, that you use your microphones when speaking, and our registered speakers as well. I think you've probably been advised the process, but we have a microphone here at the podium that you could use. So in terms of how the planning applications are presented, they do work through in a specific order, and we have case officer presents the report, and then we have our registered speakers who have a time limit that they can speak in. Members of the committee are able to question each speaker as well, but that's just on points of clarity. At the conclusion of the debate on each application, members will all vote and come to a decision. After we finish the questions, before we go into debate, then I, as the chairman and vice chair, will traditionally move and second the officer recommendation. That is not an indication of how we will vote. It is simply to get it into a debate so we can move things forward. So just some guidance really around your IT devices, because we're obviously considering a number of applications today, and outcomes are important to everybody, and we do need to give our full attention to what is being said and not be distracted. So can I please ask that mobile phones are set to silent, or mobile devices are set to silent? And in the case of members of the committee, please could you refrain from looking at your mobiles, just look at your laptop, which has got your agenda on it, but please avoid looking at your mobiles and what have you, just do it so that you're not distracted and it doesn't give the appearance to applicants or supporters or objectors or watching members of the public that we're not paying attention. Okay, so I'm going to just ask, actually I'm just going to do a quick introduction rather than go around everybody. So we have Mr. Fairbairn, who's the solicitor, Councillor Pearce is vice chair, and Councillor Young is chairman, and Ms. Henderson Smith, who is standing in as head of planning for the meeting today, and will also be presenting two of the applications as well. So we will make a start, and item 1, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Leach and Councillor Renders, and Councillor Cheadle is standing in for Councillor Leach. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2 is the declarations of interest. So in accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to disclose any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in items to be considered at this meeting. I will kick off on this one on item 1861/21/CAC, as it's recorded on the agenda. I'm a ward member. I'm also an Oakhampton Town Councillor, but I don't sit on the planning committee, so I've had nothing to do with the application at that level. And really just in the interest of transparency as well, it's just to say that some members of the committee did receive an email yesterday from the applicant. This has been forwarded to the planning officer. If there's anything material within that, then that will be highlighted to the committee to make sure everybody is aware. Anybody else? Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I know two of the trustees on that particular committee for the 1861/21/CAC. They are supporters of the club, which I am president, so I will not vote on that particular issue or debate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am the acting chairman of the Exbourne Neighbourhood Plan Committee, and I want to declare that. And I'm also the agent for application number 2927/21/FUL and that's Mr. Stephen Blakeman. He is the chairman of the Exbourne Parish Council, and we meet in pursuit of council business. However, I have not formed an opinion regarding that application. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I also declare an interest in 1861/21/CAC in that I am related to one of the trustees, and like Councillor Vachon, I will not take part in the debate or the vote.
Thank you. Any more, please? Okay, Mr. Trevor.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just clarify Councillor Ratcliffe's interest? He said he was acting as the agent for the applicant. That sounds like a professional relationship. Might be disclosed of interest.
I'll just repeat that I am the acting chairman of the Neighbourhood Plan Committee. I've been doing that for a while, but I also know the agent, Mr. Stephen Blackman. He is the chairman of the parish council, so therefore we do meet at parish council meetings. But I was saying, in pursuant of those parish council business, I have not informed an opinion regarding the application.
Apologies, I understand.
Sorry, I didn't make it clear.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think that's everybody. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. There aren't any at this time. Item 4, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of March 2022. They can be found between pages 1 and 6 of your agenda. Is everybody happy that I sign these as a true and accurate record? No resolutions? Thank you. I will do that after the meeting. Don't forget. Okay, so now we move to the planning applications themselves, and we will start off, just hold up my page, with 18874/214, which is the land at parcel 4B east of Crediton Road, Oakhampton, and Ms. Henderson Smith, who is multitasking frantically, is going to be the presenting officer on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. The first application on the agenda is within parcel 4 of the East of Oakhampton TTV 14 housing allocation. It'll be familiar to many of the members of the committee, and various applications on the East of Oakhampton have come before committee in recent months. The application has been called in by Councillor Leach for the reasons set out on page 7 of the agenda. The proposal before you is for a new vehicular access into parcel 4B from Crediton Road with an associated footway. Before I continue, I've got some updates to the report just to share with you. So page 9 of your report states 2 views for Oakhampton Town Council. Apologies, this should state that Oakhampton Hamlets Parish Council have the neutral view on the 4th of the 8th, and Oakhampton Town Council objected on the 10th of the 8th. So they are not 2 updates from the Town Council. As I say, it was Oakhampton Hamlets Parish Council with the neutral view on the 4th of the 8th and Town Council objection on the 10th of the 8th. Similarly, there's an update to the Lead Local Flood Authority comments from Devon County Council. On page 9, it states they will be updated at committee, and in the time between the committee report being written and today's committee, the objection from the LLFA has been withdrawn on the 7th. There's no in-principle objections from then, based on additional information that's been submitted by the applicants, providing there's detailed drainage conditions applied, which cover the design, construction, management, and the future exceedance flows. Those can be covered within the recommendation for drainage condition or conditions as already set out in the report. One last update, Devon County Council Highways on page 12. I can confirm that the traffic regulation order to lower this section of Crediton Road to a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit from a 60 national speed limit along this stretch of Crediton Road has now been formally agreed by Devon County Council. I think at the time the comments were made, it was still in its consultation process, but that has now been agreed. That has not occurred physically on site as yet, but all the process and procedure and consultations for that have completed, and it has been approved. So as such, the previously approved splay and hedge loss agreed for the already approved access into this site has now or can now be re-engineered in line with the requirement for a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, thus reducing the visibility splay required on the hedge loss as it was originally engineered and designed for a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit. So that's now dropped to a 40. So returning to the proposal then, the site includes the access, footway and associated visibility displays and the drainage system, which would serve both this section of infrastructure itself, but also the wider parcel 4B. So just checking you can see that. So this is the area that would be involved with displays and takes in a section of what we would call 4A, this parcel here, north of Pedderton Road, and 4B, this parcel to the south. This area here includes the first section of access way going into the site, and this larger rectangle here is the attenuation system and drainage set up, designed, as I say, to deal with both this section of infrastructure itself, but also the future housing expected to be on parcel 4B, which is set out in the report, but as an aid memoir to members and for the public, that 4B site has got outline planning permission with the first access approved to it for residential, but does not at this point in time have a reserve matters application for a detailed design. So in slightly more detail, this is the proposed access point. For those who know the site well, the approved access point is further up the hill towards the pair of semi-detached properties. We're going out towards North Taunton. This secondary proposed access is further down towards Brighton Stream and the new roundabout that's been put in recently. So there you can see the stream and its associated trees coming in here, the access point and the displays required, and the drainage system associated with that. This plan just shows the location of the two accesses in relationship to one another. So this more northeasterly access was the one already approved in relation to the outline permission, and this is the or southerly, if you like, westerly access that's now being proposed and is before members today for consideration. These plans were requested by members to just be shown at committee so that you can see the context. So this is essentially the whole of the TTB 14 allocation. This is parcels 3 here and 4 with 4A here and 4B here. This is, and I would stress, this is an indicative layout that was approved, that outline. So the actual physical layout that's been approved or that potentially can be achieved don't bear resemblance to this, but this was the outline scheme just showing the idea of development of the site. And as you can see, there's an access shown in here, but at that point, no vehicular access shown in to the south. But this is how the sites relate to one another in terms of the development out of that area to the east of Oakhampton. As I've said, this would be the second vehicular access to serve 4B. The first, as I say, being approved to outline. There are several considerations, but the principal issues with regards to this proposal are the impact of the access on ecology, landscape and the visual entrance to the site and the town itself, versus the adverse landscape impacts and the poor urban design that would be likely to result with only a single access into this site. It's likely that a single access into this site would also lead to a reduction in the quantum of housing that's able to be achieved within the 4B site, just due to the topography and constraints of the site and the way that it would have to be developed out if there was only a single vehicular access. That in turn is likely to affect the viability of the site, which for members' benefit and as a memory jogger, it wasn't fully viable at policy levels when it was put through an outline stage, and it achieved 20% affordable housing contribution, predominantly because of the large payments from these sites required towards the infrastructure of the primary school and the link road. So to take members, take you through the site for those who are less familiar with it, what you're looking at there is the entrance into the east of Oakhampton. On the right-hand side, you can see the housing, which is the AdPad development, which is the last houses to really be built out in parcel 2. And on the left-hand side there, you can just about see the crane going up, which is the development of parcel 3 by Barrister David Wilson, who are the applicants for this application before you today. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay on the laptop. So again, this is looking down Creditor Road into the entrance to town, and the application site is this section here. And you can see the trees here, which edge the Brightly stream as a kind of point of context. Looking up from town with the town behind you, again, the access point in here as proposed. And again, sorry for these photographs, the sun was not in an ideal position. But again, that's the site, and these are the adjacent trees on Brightly Stream. Parcel 3 is the green section, you can just about see them behind. So on this site, leaving with this photograph on site, this is taken from the public open space on the Linden Homes site. You've probably seen this image before. This is Brightly Stream. This is the site that we're talking about. This field in here is parcel 4B. This is the copse opposite the site. So there is a very absolute balance of material considerations to be considered here, but officers have been involved in quite extensive pre-application discussions regarding the potential layout and development options for parcel B. On balance, we consider that the secondary access, when combined with the associated mitigation and enhancement that's being proposed, is the better proposal rather than the single vehicular access, which would result in a less efficient use of the site in terms of its delivery of housing, thus affecting the viability, as I've intimated, and also further requiring quite heavily engineered layout and retaining structures, resulting in quite a poor urban design, which would be very visible across the Brightly Valley from Kellens Lane and the Linden development and Playstay. So that's the view you've got in front of you at the moment. The whole of the upper section of the Linden Homes development is at a similar height to this. So this development site is quite visible. And without secondary access coming in at the bottom, it does then mean that the only way really of developing out the site due to the constraints and the quite steep topography on this site is to have quite a large and very visible retaining structure within the centre of it, essentially creating terraces, which would be quite visible and leads to quite a loss of land and therefore a lowering of the delivery of housing units. So, as you'll have seen from the report, the various necessary arboricultural and ecological reports required to properly inform that judgment from officers and the recommendation were submitted with this scheme, and the various specialists have no objections. Both Devon County Council ecologists and West Devon officers consider that the proposal passes the 3 derogation tests regarding the presence of dormice. That's because they're a European protected species. We have to go through a certain set of tests. They're set out within your report, but it's considered that those tests are passed and therefore that Natural England would grant the necessary licence for the works. The tree officer was involved heavily in pre-application discussions and has no objections as set out in the report. And similarly, Devon County Council, as I've updated you, as the lead local flood authority, now have no objections subject to the conditions they've requested. So as such, then overall officers support the proposal in this instance as a considered solution to the development of a constrained and topographically challenging site, allocated site, I might add. And as such, the recommendation is for conditional approval as per page 7 of your agendas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, we do, as we move into questions, we do have Mr. Townsend with us from County in case there are any particular questions. Councillor Mott, your agenda first.
Thank you. Well, I don't doubt that officers have worked hard to come up with a good solution for this site. It's disappointing that this application isn't delivered as part of the whole so that we can see the full impact on the site and how this access would benefit it and what the mitigation would be alongside it. I'm just curious though, you mentioned that it improves the viability of the site by allowing this second access. Does that mean then that we will have renegotiation of the 106, bearing in mind that that was based on one access and a low viability for this site?
Through you then, Chair, if I may. With regards to your first point, Councillor Mott, the discussion was had as to whether this change was tabled as an entire reserve matters with that secondary access shown. And understandably, in my view, it's come forward on its own because it's an awful lot of investment to come up to the point of an entire reserve matters layout based on potential agreement of a secondary access if members then weren't supportive of a secondary access. So it's a bit chicken and egg. It's difficult to develop up a detailed scheme for the entirety of the site without knowing whether the secondary access is acceptable or not, because the layouts would have to be quite different if they were or they weren't. So you may consider it was the wrong choice, but as I say, that was the reasoning behind it, which I have some sympathy with. With regards to the viability, sorry, I'm glad you raised the question because I want to clarify the point. Having a secondary access won't make this scheme more viable, but the issue if it only keeps one access is that it may be that it's less viable because the quantum of houses that can actually be achieved when one access is lower than it was considered to be. Because it was only done as a desktop exercise at outline stage, it was only an indicative layout as to how many units could go on there. The full kind of engineering, topography and, swings for the highway to access those properties won't have been looked at in detail. Now that has been looked at in detail, it's clear that without a secondary access, the amount of retaining structure and engineering of almost slalom Alp-like road going through that site does mean that it is possible that less units, or it's very probable, I've seen the plans, that less units can be achieved on that site. So it may be that the viability has to be revisited. So as I say, it's not that a secondary access makes this more viable and we can go back to the drawing board on that one and revisit viability, but not having secondary access could well make it less viable.
Right.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I have Councillor Spettergue, then Councillor Moyes.
Thank you, Chair. My question really relates to Councillor Mott's question. How is the amount of housing you can provide on the site is obviously affected by which plan, how many entrances you use, but which provides overall the most potential housing and in relation to that affordable housing?
For you, Chair. Having a secondary access, from the plans I've seen, the various iterations have worked up schemes on this site that I've seen. Having a secondary access allows for a greater number of units overall, just because it means that you can have a secondary access coming at the bottom of the site to serve the lower tranche of houses without having to sort of slalom and access all the way down from the top. So in terms of number of units on site, a secondary access improves that quantum. In terms of that relationship to affordable housing, the overall Section 106 that goes with the outline on this site secures 20%. And I've no reason to think that that 20% can't be achieved with a secondary access. To remind members, or for any that weren't on the committee on that day, the Reserve Matters application for Parcel 4A to the north of Edison Road came before members probably a year ago. Time flies when you're having fun. And the entirety of the affordable housing for 4A is also on 4B, along with the affordable for 4B. So there's no affordable housing on 4A, but that hasn't reduced the quantum overall on the site, but all of the affordable housing due to connectivity and other various issues that officers were in agreement with and members approved, the affordable housing amount for 4A and the affordable housing amount for 4B would sit on the 4B allocation that we're discussing now. So as I say, I hope that answers the question with regards to kind of the layout. I think the risk of having no secondary access is that the overall quantum, whether that's market housing, would have to be revisited in order to get the engineering structures in. And if that affects viability, then it's at the applicant's discretion as to whether they wish to revisit that.
Thank you.
Councillor Moyes.
Yes, I think these are Mr Townsend's issues. The access on the bend, looking at sketch, did seem as if it was sort of right on the bend, but I didn't know whether visibility issues would sort that out. And also, I may have got my locations muddled up, but I seem to remember local people were wanting a 30-mile-an-hour limit along here. Obviously, 40 is better than 60, but is there any likelihood it would be reduced to 30?
Mr Townsend, if you probably easiest if you did come here and then you can use that microphone. Thank you.
Good morning, members. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, you had a plan earlier, and if I could ask you to put the one up with visibility displays actually shown on it. There's one before that, possibly. There. The visibility shows that it's improved in the blue line is the important one, the visibility line showing to the far distance. Also, the purple one shows to the near distance as well. The visibility to comply with the reduced speed limit of 40 miles an hour is available for exiting vehicles, but it is also, and this is important, available for vehicles approaching the site from the west, trying to turn right into the site. So if they're carrying out the maneuver turning right in, they're observable by vehicles approaching from the west behind them. And also they will be able to see vehicles travelling to the west, coming from North Taunton, heading towards Oakhampton. With respect to the speed limit, the County Council has very strict policies for when speed limits can be applied. This, to actually get it to a 40, required a special exception because it didn't strictly comply with the county's criteria for a 40 miles an hour road. I suspect it is incredibly unlikely that it is going to ever comply with the criteria for a 30 mile an hour road, which requires generally frontage development throughout. The designs that I've seen for 4A and 4B will not present the sort of visage that the County Council would consider appropriate for a 30, and it is for that reason that they applied a 40 instead. How do I switch it off? Sorry, Chair.
Press the same button again.
Same button.
Now, Councillor Basham and Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. The reason why this has been brought into committee is from Councillor Leach. One of the issues, main issues, was the drainage, the water and flood risk, flood risk and drainage, which goes into the Brightly Pond stream. I notice on page 11 of our notes here, under the water, flood risk and drainage considerations, it says that at the time of writing, negotiations were ongoing regarding drainage. However, it's anticipated the issue can be overcome by the committee or addressed by a condition. Has those negotiations taken place? And if so, what was the response? Thank you.
The census did actually bring that update right at the start, but it might be helpful if you'd be kind just to reiterate that. Thank you.
Certainly, Chair. Yes, Councillor Basham, those discussions have been ongoing. I'm afraid it's just because of the lead-in time for writing reports to the committee. But those conversations and liaison with the developers have been ongoing. And the update we've now had from the lead local flood authorities that they've got no objections subject to conditions. And the conditions they've required can be covered within the generic drainage condition that's recommended on page 8. So they've now removed their objection and they're comfortable with the scheme subject to conditions. And they're pretty standard conditions, just details of construction, details of exceedance flows, how the flood system will be managed and maintained. They're the standard conditions I would expect to see once they're happy with the overall scheme.
Thank you. Can I just have a supplementary on that, Chair? Yes, would those plans affect the number of houses on that particular site? I notice there's a pond going in there, which there is proposed housing to go over the top of.
If that, through you, Chair, sorry for my answer. If that reference was to the indicative layout plan that I showed, I mean, that was just an indicative plan that was put in an outline quite some years ago now, second, I think, just to show potential arrangement of the site. The drainage scheme that's proposed now, as far as I'm aware, wouldn't affect the quantum. It was always anticipated that, you know, the site would need a certain amount of infrastructure, whether that's below ground attenuation tanks or the SUD scheme above the ground. And so there are there's no implication for the quantum based on the SUD scheme that's proposed now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, there is, I'll come to you in just a sec, Councillor Pearce. I think there are several questions, obviously, with members expressing concerns about the number of houses. So I think possibly it could be covered in a response in terms of as to whether this change would make any difference to the number of buildings that would be deliverable, which were agreed. I know the layout comes forward with reserve matters, which were agreed at outline. And I think from what you're saying, the answer to that is no, it won't have a negative impact on what was agreed in terms of when the land's allocated and it's outlined.
Yes, Chair, you're quite correct. So the outline for 4A and 4B is for up to 400 units. 220 dwellings have been approved, on parcel 3. And sorry, I'm just looking through the history of exactly how many were approved on the reserve matters site for 4A. I can check that if members need to know. But essentially, the proposal that's before you today would not have a negative impact on this site achieving the remainder, if you want to call it that, of the 400 units that's been agreed, or up to 400 units agreed across the two. So not approving it could have an implication. Approving it doesn't affect the achievement of those units.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to check. It was a deliverable scheme. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. My question relates to the speed limits. Good morning, Mr. Townsend. You said that we've been advised there's a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit going in. Is that going to take into account the original access into this site, or is it just for this piece here?
Can I ask you to put up the larger overall map, please? Sorry, through you, Chair. A bit more than that, if you can. A bit more than that, if you can, please.
I can.
You had you had a map that shows Hitchcock Cross.
I think it was the first one, actually.
First one.
Sorry.
Oh, that was it. One. You see the crossroads at the top of the plan there, Councillor Pearce, the one at the top of the hill, which is where actually the character of the road changes as you come into Oakhampton from that point down the hill. The 40 will apply from that crossroads down to the new roundabout, which is where it will change to 30.
Right, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, because that road is very dangerous in the winter time when the road is wet and the angle of the sun shining through. So even though there's going to be a significant splay, if this application today is approved, there's going to be a significant splay there being put in, but there will still be a curve there, which will, will have create a blind spot as one comes around a part of that road coming down the hill.
The visibility splays that are to be provided that are shown on the plans comply with the speed limit, and the You'll be pleased to hear, Councillor Pearce, I totally agree with you about the suitability of that road for a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. And I was instrumental in getting it changed to 40-mile-an-hour speed limit in spite of the fact that it might strictly comply with county policy.
Right. And the 30 then starts at the roundabout, you say? There.
Through you, Chair, it starts just before the roundabout, on the approach to the roundabout, about where the cursor is now, possibly a little bit further northeast than that, just after you come round the bend.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and just to draw on from that a little bit, because there is already an agreement with part of 4A for an uncontrolled crossing. Where does the uncontrolled crossing sit in relation to this proposed secondary access?
Through you, Chair. Sorry, the cursor's a bit slow to catch up. Blaming the cursor, not me. It's here. So the uncontrolled crossing point is here. That was approved as part of the parcel 4A detailed layout. And if you like, the other side of that would form part of this, or is in line also with this application. Both sides of it were agreed as part of the 4A detailed layout, because the 4A red line took in a very small area of this 4B site, so that you have both sides of the crossing. And as is detailed in the report, the displays required for that pedestrian crossing point have been overlain with the potential options for this vehicular access in order to try and minimise the overall loss of hedging and trees with the two separate points. But it's showing. It's here. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I just wanted to, obviously Councillor Moore bringing just so I just really wanted to double check with Mr Townsend that you are satisfied on the safety on this, given that the low level of sun is particular, and also the steepness of the road going in both directions and its tendency to freeze with water running down it, which any of us who from that area will be very familiar with that when it does get icy, that road, and you are satisfied that it will be safe for pedestrians coming across an uncontrolled crossing with vehicles that might well be coming down.
It is very difficult to take into account localised temporary weather conditions and sun and things like that when you're looking at design, because that isn't generally addressed in the national design criteria. But I am satisfied that, commensurate with every other situation in the county, this is an acceptable solution, and the visibility provided is acceptable. And it is a B road, so it does fall on the gritting route, unlike some other routes in the county.
Thank you. Councillor Moyes, did you have a question?
Yes, I wish Devon County would think a bit more about safety and less about rules. Sorry, I'm not having a go at you. But, an uncontrolled crossing, does that mean there's a beacon in the middle, or is it just nothing there at all? What actually does it mean?
Through you, Chair. It's drop crossings with tactile pavings and suitable visibility to cross the road.
That goes right across the road, you mean?
That's correct.
There's no stop point.
There's no width to provide a refuge, and if there were to be, unfortunately, that would have a further impact on the vegetation either side of the road, which I suspect my colleagues in planning may have some issues with.
Okay, thank you. And of course that has already been approved in a previous application on the previous side. I just wanted to get it in the context, yeah, with the actual crossing and where with the access point where it sits. In your report, Senator Smith, you refer to also the second part of this as a footpath. I don't think you described exactly where that was going to be. That's internally in the site.
Yeah, through you, Chair, Townsend also wants to comment, but yes, this shows it slightly better. If you look at the access point, you can see the tactile paving shown here, and then this footpath running along here. So what it's really asking for is the access way, and then the first section of highway, if you like, into the site, including the section of footway that would normally be expected to be on the side of that.
Mr. Townsend, did you want to add to that?
Thank you. Sorry, Anna, could you go back to the one before, please, again? Yes, sorry, I was going to mention this when I was speaking, and I apologise, I forgot it, Chair. You will see that the orange footway sort of stops in the middle of nowhere adjoining the, that's because that's where it meets up with what was approved on the detailed consent. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Thank you. And there's any further questions? Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you. The detailed design of the layout of the housing hasn't been put forward or agreed yet. But I wondered if we're minded to approve this application today, it gives two accesses into this and out of the site. Will those accesses be, in a sense, joined, or will some houses be constrained to use one access and other houses constrained to use the other one? I mean, is there a through road, I think, or will there be a through road?
Through you, Chair. The plans I have seen, bear in mind I can't predict what Reserve Matters application would come in, but the plans I've seen, there isn't a through road. There's a through pedestrian link, and I think that can be achieved both on a slope and following the roadway. But there isn't a through road between the two, because that's exactly the point. If you could take a through road from the first access all the way down, that's what requires big pieces of engineering structure. Having the secondary access means that you don't have to run a road through the more difficult lower section of the site where the topography is more challenging. So therefore, the top route takes in most of the housing, and then the second access serves, for want of a better way of putting it, a cul-de-sac area off that at the bottom. So there's physical access for people on foot, but not for cars to go through from north to south. Hence, that's the issue essentially.
That's good. Do you have another question?
Thank you, Chairman. Mine was a comment actually about the layout. I mean, I'll do that in debate.
Yeah, if you haven't got to debate that one. Any more questions, anybody? Okie dokie. In which case, then we'll move on to our registered speakers. So we have Mr. Allwood from Barratt Homes, I believe. Lovely. Have you used the microphone before? Okay, there's a button just to your right. If you just turn.
There we go. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Thank you. And you will have 3 minutes, which I think you've probably already been advised. Mr. Hall will give you a brief warning when you're due to finish, and I will need to stop you if you've not finished at the time. Thank you.
Good morning, members. My name's Daniel Allwood. I'm the Divisional Planning Manager at Barratt David Wilson Homes. BDW has been working with your planning officers for a number of years to bring forward development to the east of Oakhampton, which is the allocation with a joint local plan and benefits from outline permission for 400 units. Whilst parcels 3 and 4A benefit from detailed planning approval, a Reserve Matters application has not as yet been submitted on parcel 4B. Instead, a significant amount of time has been spent on developing proposals that seek to minimise the impact of the development beyond that anticipated by the outline application. This has already been seen through the proposals to reduce the speed limit, as we've had quite an in-depth conversation about in relation to Crediton Road at 40 mph from the national speed limit, which will create a safer environment for residents and result in the reduction of the quantum of hedgerow loss from the northern access point in parcel 4B. During the detailed pre-application discussions, the local planning authorities officers and the applicants have explored a layout for parcel 4B, which utilised the consented single point of access in the northern western corner of the site. That work demonstrated that significant engineering retaining structures would be necessary, which would be visually prominent, particularly from the south. The need for the additional retaining structures would also reduce the quantum of development of the site, including that of the affordable housing. To overcome these issues, a second option was developed, utilising a second access into the southwest corner of the site. In operation with the northern western access, allows the creation of 2 development plateaus. This work demonstrated that less engineered retaining structures were required, which in turn would reduce the visual prominence of the development, particularly from the south. It has also ensured that the quantum of development would be at the levels anticipated at the outline stage, which includes the delivery of the affordable housing, much needed affordable housing. It is acknowledged that the application will result in the loss of hedgerow and trees. However, the location of the second access has been carefully considered to minimise the loss of the most valuable trees and hedgerows. The hedgerow and the tree loss resulting from the proposal will be compensated as part of the parcel 4B reserve matters. We have also agreed with the planning condition requiring a 10% biodiversity net gain from this proposal, which can be accommodated by the wider landholding.
30 seconds.
Officers have confirmed there are no technical constraints to the proposal, including relation to highways, impacts, flood risk and drainage, ecology and trees. It is considered that on balance benefits delivered by this scheme, which include facilitating a better urban design solution for the forthcoming parcel, will ensure a viable development, outweigh any residual harm in the planning balance. Therefore, we respectfully request that members support the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well done within the time. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Olive? It would appear not. That is, Councillor Pearce, you really got away with it. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Given that the possibility of having two entrances into this area of land, it will enable you to have two separate estate roads, if you like, inside. So will that do away with the, when you come forward with reserve matters, not having a through road will, effectively make two separate developments? You see where I'm coming from? But yes, yeah. Okay, that's fine. I just wondered whether that will allow for more houses, or will it, if there's not a continuous road on the whole land, if this is approved today, any effect that's made by this new entrance going ahead, because I was on the committee when we did the outline permission, when the indicative site. So any houses that are lost close to the road where this entrance goes in can be made up if the road, we don't have a through road on the estate or on the development as a whole. So are you looking at not having a continuous road? I think one of the members brought it up earlier, actually, you won't have a through road. Is that something that you will consider when you come forward with reserve matters plans?
Just to answer that, as far as the design has got at the moment, and as Anna was saying earlier, that it's not planned that there'll be a through road, and that sort of goes back to the point that that's not really possible, right, in the sense of big engineering constraints. So no, I would say no.
Right. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Any more questions, Councillor Cheadle?
If we think of this as sort of two proposals, one with a single access, one with a double access, does the housing density change as a result of the decision we make today?
In terms of the density, obviously, if we were to continue on with a single access, that would reduce the number of units. So it'd be a less dense development overall. But obviously, there'd be fewer units, but there'd be far more engineering works on site. Obviously, as a result of two accesses, there will be less engineering, but there'll be the quantum of units as part of the outline.
Yes, I probably phrased my question non-technically, if I can put it that way. I actually meant the pattern density, if I could put it that way, of housing. Putting more houses on the site mean that, in a sense, each house has less space than it would otherwise have.
I think it's sort of strange what would come under the reserve matters application, because that one still hasn't come forward yet. I mean, that would be down to the developer to do the layout and design of the buildings coming forward.
With respect, I think it's important that we understand that sort of thing before making a decision on how many entrances there are. If it's going to impact on the ability of the developer to bring forward a particular design.
Are you able to just give an indication? I appreciate it's not a time indication, it's but an indication of your thoughts.
The Residual amount of units left over in the outline will be delivered as part of the reserve matters in this scheme. So the amount of units left will be with regards to two accesses coming forward on the site will allow the amount of units to come forward. The full amount of units left over in that quota.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what we've got strange noises here. I'm hoping the live stream is okay. Right, okay. Lovely, thank you. Were there any more questions? Councillor Mott.
Thank you. Sorry, because it probably strays into the reserved matters as well. With this second entrance and this effectively then being, for all intents and purposes, two estates, can we have assurances, and I appreciate it is part of the reserved matters, but can we have assurances that the affordable will not be lumped in one area with the more desirable, sorry, probably the wrong term to use there, but the open market housing then being in the other section?
I don't think that's a fair question to answer, Councillor. I'm sorry. That one is for reserved matters. This is we're purely looking at the access here at the moment. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Would you mind just telling you thank you, turning my phone off? Ms. Henderson Smith, I think. Yeah. Would you want to bring something?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just to come back to Councillor Cheadle's question about the sort of density, and I appreciate what you mean, the developable area within the site rather than the site itself and the density of that. So, as I intimated previously, if there is no secondary access and it's done off just a single access, what that requires in every sort of viable option I've seen is for quite a large section of the centre of the site to become a terrace split, if you like, a bank, a retaining structure. So that does use up quite a large section of the centre of the site as a footprint to essentially create these two level plateaus or levelish plateaus to then develop. So in terms of the resultant layout, it ends up with a section sort of in at the bottom and a section at the top. And yes, I suppose it's likely that they would be denser because you've got this quite large section in the middle of the site that has to be sacrificed to creating two plateaus that can actually be delivered. So hopefully that helps. Whereas with the second access like this, it negates the issue for such a large retaining structure in the centre of the south, and the site can be developed out in a slightly more of the site can be used more efficiently for delivery of housing and usable space than having this large engineering structure in the middle with a single access.
The reason for my question, thank you for that, and it sort of goes a long way to answering the question. The reason for the question, I was rather thinking of the future residents of this site and how they would feel about the development that was brought forward. And if they're also all crammed in on top of each other, it would be a less inviting place to live than if they were more equitably spread out.
So
that was the purpose of the question.
Yeah, and so as I think it's sort of intimated within the report that part of the reason that officers are supportive of this proposal is that the resultant options with regards to amenity, urban design and everything that goes with that are better in our view with a secondary access than the quite limited options and usable spaces results with only one access. If I may just come back briefly on Councillor Mott's point, just to really reassure members with regards to the development of the site, if there is a secondary access, we talked about it being two estates. The layouts I've seen is still very much integrated as one development. It wouldn't, I'm not saying it's beyond the wit of man or woman to develop it out into separate sections, but it's all still quite integrated with a pedestrian access, it's shared amenity spaces and everything else. And with regards to the affordable housing layout, obviously we have requirements within the SPD about how many we want in a cluster, not more than 12 and not less than X amount. But the delivery of the AH and the triggers for that and how that's delivered and the tenure and everything else is absolutely tied down in the section 106 outline. So for any members that weren't present some years ago in that outline, it is extremely well tied down in that outline. So I don't have any concerns personally, professionally about the delivery of the AH on the reserve matters scheme here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The ward member is Councillor Leach, and he has actually submitted a written response that so it's actually going to read out, so I should be timing. Okay, thank you when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I have to say that what I've written here today is not aimed at the developers. I understand that they have a big problem on the site, but they have worked hard with the planning officer as well as the tree specialist to try to find the best way around it. I've asked for this application to come before the full West Devon Borough Council Planning Committee for the reasons shown on the report, so I will not repeat it here. This site was included in the original West Devon core strategy and later formed part of the joint local plan. During the consultations on both of these plans, the local residents and the town and parish councils said that this site, and indeed both sections of Parcel 4, were not suitable for any development due to the topography of this area. They only grudgingly agreed when it was proposed that they would be of a very low density with a rural hamlet style of property. Something else that seems to have been lost in the overall planning for Oakhampton. The concerns then, and which continue to be, are the steepness of the fields which feed into the Brightly Brook. When we have excessive rainstorms, the brook can flood, and this can lead to flooding in the village of Brightly. Attenuation of the water on this steep slanting field will need to be very well designed if it has any chance of controlling the water as it runs off what will be a heavy developed site. Parcel 3, which is opposite Parcel 4B and on the other side of the brook, has now had many countless tons of historic peat removed due to the new development being constructed there. So we have lost a very large sponge that has historically soaked up a greater deal of water, which will only exacerbate the drainage problem in this area. Opening up another entrance to 4B, losing hedges and trees that also soak up water can only make the situation worse. I fully understand that this whole area has already been granted permission for development, which to my mind is a very big mistake that started with the West Devon forward planners not listening to what the local farmers and residents were very concerned about some years ago. But we can't go backwards. We must, however, make very sure that what is built today does have a detrimental effect, does not have a detrimental effect on those living downstream of these developments, as well as those who will purchase properties on these developments in future. I'm sorry that there could not have been a site visit to the full committee to see the situation on the ground. It seems that it was seen as being too dangerous for us to meet there. And I think that this alone speaks volumes as to what the problems are now and will continue to be on that section of Creston Road. Through Oakhampton Town Council, I've been involved since 2007 in trying to get our previous West Devon forward planners to change tack on what they envisage for Oakhampton. And each time I now enter Oakhampton from the Crediton Road end, I say a very big sorry to the town for not being able to alter what has happened here. I can only hope the committee today will try their best to at least try to make sure that what is actually developed is the best it can be.
Thank you. I won't be able to answer any questions because Councillor Leach isn't here. So I will just offer members if you have any further questions for any of the officers before we move forward. No, okay. In that case, I will move the recommendation on page 7, which is for conditional approval. Is there a second of that?
I'll be the second, Chairman.
Thank you. We are now in debate, members. Who wishes to go first? Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you. When I read the officer's report, I thought I was probably going to object to this on the grounds that the drainage specialists had said that it was unacceptable, but we now are told that they are content with the proposal that's been made. So my mind has changed. I'm now prepared to support this application on the grounds that I think it gives the developer greater choice in the way he organises the site. And I hope in that discussion with the specialists we can use that opportunity to develop a better place for people to live than we would have otherwise had to do, with that chicane or whatever it is sort of snaking through the site doesn't, to me, feel very attractive as a solution. So I hope that this gives us an opportunity to develop a site that is significantly better than it would be with only one entrance.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chairman. Bearing in mind that this land already has outline approval, we need to make sure that we bring forward something that's as best as can be. And therefore, I feel that we have to support this application, although some members may have concerns about the loss of trees and other issues which have come forward. But if we have a better development because of this second entrance and a less urbanised look from across the valley, which we would have if it was just one entrance, and the significant engineering works that would have to take place within the site to have the through road or the circular road put in that we saw when the indicative plans came forward for the outline permission, I think quite honestly it's a no-brainer. I think we've got to support this, and it will hopefully bring forward a much better and more pleasing development when we come to reserve matters. So therefore, I will be supporting the application as set out.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the last two councillors' responses. But one thing that worries me somewhat is that we're presented with an extra element to a site, and we don't know what's going to happen to it after this. We don't see what development's going to follow from that. And it's very difficult to envisage what's going to happen. And we've been told this second entrance is needed, but we don't exactly know why or how that's going to fit in with the overall plan at this stage. It would have been nice to have some more detailed plan before making this decision. Perhaps the developers need to take that on board for future plans. So I look forward to seeing the more detailed plans and how this all fits in. I do have concerns that the density might be higher in some places because of the extra elements that are going in here with the drainage and the roads there. It does mean that there might be less amenity space within that. I don't know. We can't see that at this stage. So as I say, we have to agree that it does need to go in, but we just hope that Barratt Homes have actually done their homework and they've done some sort of preliminary planning on how everything's going to fit around this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anybody else? No, okay. And yes, I will remind members that this is part of the outline and that the reserves matters will come forward. And we have clarified that what was agreed at outline in terms of numbers and type is deliverable with the changes to the outline. Okay, members, if there's nothing else, then we will take this to the vote. So all those in favour of conditional approval, please show.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. That is carried. So thank you very much indeed for your contribution. And thank you, Mr. Townsend. I know you need to make a move. Thank you very much. So we will move on to the next application, which is, do you need time to set the actual presentation up, or is it next? Oh, that's fine. Next. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the next application is 2927/21/FUL, which is the land adjacent to Hayfield Road. It's Exbourne, and welcome to Mr. Jeffrey, who is fresh to West Devon, not fresh to planning, but fresh to West Devon. So nice to meet you, and over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The application is for a change of use of land and conversion of an existing small stable block to provide holiday accommodation. The application has been called in by Councillor Ratcliffe, primarily due to a change in recommendation during the determination process of the application. We have had 2 letters of representation received the application, both of which are classified as undecided. They do raise a few issues. One is concerns over the need for further development, concerns over incremental development and possibility of it being an unrestricted dwelling, and access for horse traders through the village. Or they do raise positive comments in that it won't displace homes in the village for holiday accommodation. So it's agricultural land. It's north of Exbourne. For the purposes of JLP policy, it's in a countryside location. The site is around 300 metres north of Exbourne and is accessed via a country lane via Hayfield Road. The application site is around 50 metres long, 25 metres in width. It has the existing stable block located on its southern edge. The existing access is Hayfield Road to the south-west of the site. The existing barn was approved in 2002. There are a couple restrictive conditions of relevance to mention in relation to that. In that the permission shall inure for the benefit of the applicant only and shall not inure for the benefit of the land, and also that the building as approved shall be removed if within 10 years from construction the agricultural use of the building ceases. You can see the proposed elevations here and plans. There is no increase in size or footprint of the stable block. It effectively infills existing openings with glazing, consists of a kitchen, diner, living space, and a double bedroom en suite. Site plan consists of segregating the southwest parts of the existing field around the stables, so that it utilises the existing access, and it will be divided using a number of new hedge banks. Drainage proposed via a soakaway and style drainage via a package treatment plan. In terms of the principle of development on the application, as I mentioned, although Exbourne is recognised as a stable village in the third level of the assessment hierarchy, the site is neither within or on the edge of the built-up area, and therefore the site represents development in the countryside. In relation to TTV 26, proposals do not respond to a proven agricultural need or occupation that requires a countryside location, and the proposals conflict with TTV 26 in this respect. As it proposes use for holiday accommodation, policy Dev 15 is of relevance supporting the rural economy. This does provide some support for chalet and tourist accommodation, provided it is in a suitable location. And as I've said, this is in a countryside location, an unsustainable location, and doesn't have support from from policy TTV 26. Where compatible with the rural road network is another stipulation of policy Dev 15. The access to the site is along narrow country lanes, which are unlikely to facilitate modes of transport other than the private vehicle. And policy Dev 15 also requires that a proposal such as this responds to an identified local need. The applicant has identified a local need for people going on equine holidays where they can bring their horses. Officers have concerns over potential for this to result in requirement for further development to accommodate the horses, particularly in terms of extra stables, as we are losing the stables on the site as it is to provide holiday accommodation. The applicant has provided a sustainable travel plan, which does look to provide some positive measures to mitigate private vehicle use from the sites. In terms of design and landscape impact, there are no significant concerns because it's basically as existing with some proposed landscape planting, although the potential for further development on the site to cater for these horse holidays obviously could have a negative impact further down the line. This is an image going north from Exbourne towards the site. This is the site access. This is a view from the north, looking across the site. You see the stables and a caravan which is currently on site, looking back towards Exbourne. And this is the site when viewed from the access. So in summary, the application is recommended for refusal of relevance to sustainability or the unsustainability of this location. It introduces a self-contained holiday let into a countryside location. It does not fall within or on the edge of the built-up area of Exbourne, and the proposal is neither in a suitable location or has suitable justification that it responds to identified local need. There's also concerns over the precedent for further holiday accommodation, further development on the site if this application was to be permitted. And also of relevance, as I mentioned earlier, is the planning history on the site, and that's the restrictive conditions I mentioned earlier. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions? Jack? That's or not.
So can I just get clarity on a couple of issues, please? You talk of an agricultural building and agricultural land, but it's clearly a stable and equestrian use on that land, which would have required change of use for that land, and the planning permission gives for that building gives permission for a hay barn and field shelter and talks of agricultural land, although it is clearly a stable. So I just requiring clarity on the description that you're giving for the site, please.
Yeah, there's been no change of use from its agricultural status of the land at any point in the past, and the previous planning permission, was for a hay barn and field shelter. The appearances do suggest that it is more in use as a stable, but for planning purposes, we consider the land to be an agricultural use.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yep, okay. I have one, but it'll be for the agent. So I would like to then invite Mr. Blakeman, who is the agent, if you'd like to come forward. I know you've used our system before and have been here before, so you're familiar with it. So thank you. So we'd ask that you do use it, thank you, so that it gets picked up on live stream. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. I'm getting feedback, I think, but can you hear me okay? Fine, thank you. Just I think there should be some slides that I sent through. Perhaps if I tell you, fine, thank you. If I could just click when I'd like you to change them, that'd be great. Yes, so this is an application for conversion of a building on the edge of Exbourne. As your planning officer told you, it's about 300 metres from the village. If we could go to the next slide, please. And the application was submitted in August last year, and we've had two planning officers dealing with it. On the 22nd of October, we were told that the planning officer could support this application, but by email. And then in January this year, David was appointed as the new case officer for this application, and he again was supportive of this application until my understanding is powers from above suggested it should be refused because it's 300 metres from the village and 300 metres is considered to be an unsustainable location. I wonder about the new housing that we were discussing before this on the edge of Oakhampton, whether that is more or less than 300 metres from facilities. I would suggest it probably is a lot further than that, and with some steep hills between. Can we have the next? Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you. So the office is where we're standing now. The distance from where we are today, you are now, to the edge of Drake Road, let alone the centre of Tavistock, is a greater distance. So the driveway to this building is longer than the distance of this building from the edge of Exbourne. This building is also closer to the facilities within Exbourne by 100 metres or so than this building is to the facilities within Tavistock. So I think that you could ask the question, what development are you approving today or ever really that is closer to the settlement than this? The development further up the road, up Drake Road on the edge of Tavistock, a lot further than this is. Almost all new development is further away from a village than this. Have the next slide, please. It was also mentioned about pavements in the report, that there's lack of pavements. Exbourne Village doesn't have pavements, as a lot of villages you'll know do not have pavements. I've marked on that drawing there the red area showing where we have pavements in the village. If pavements are a real issue for refusing a planning application, well then the neighbourhood plan in Exbourne will need to change because basically the sites being considered do not have pavements. So villages do generally not have pavements.
30 seconds.
Fine, thank you. We could go to the next slide, please. There's a couple of applications which are worth mentioning. First of all, on section 7 of your agenda today, there's an application for 17 units at Patricot, about 3 miles from the nearest facilities, where you're at one stage going to be recommended to approve that application. There's also an appeal at the Countryman Inn, again several miles from anything for holiday accommodation, which the appeal inspector approved. If we could go to the next slide, please, quickly.
Sorry, I'm afraid your time is up, I'm afraid.
Could I just stop?
I'm sorry, you do need to stop, sorry, thank you. I will open it up to see, well, I will ask a question. No, Councillor Morris, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, presumably, if people are bringing horses there, they come in a trailer or whatever. But is there any riding other than along lanes? Is there any woodland close by, or presumably no moorland?
Well, riding is only part of the application. The applicant offers riding because they've got some land that would be suitable for that. If people do bring their horses, they will bring them in a trailer, and they will therefore not need additional buildings, which was a concern of the officer.
But mainly, I would suggest that this will be used for people with dogs going on holiday. People like me have a dog. My partner won't go anywhere if we can't take the dog. So facilities like this, I would suggest it's more likely to be used by people going on holiday with their dogs than it is with their horses. And that was part of the application mentioned in the design statement for that.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question because in the business plan, the applicant does state that the intent is for people to bring their own horses with them on holiday, and it also states that the holiday let will be a luxury high end, which would suggest that probably anybody bringing the horse would want it stabled when they arrived for their holiday. And I'm just wondering how that is proposed to be addressed, as there obviously won't be a stable available.
Well, people bringing horses, if they bring their horses, they will, mainly likely to be in the summer, and horses are generally kept outside in land in the summer. And if they are bringing them in stable, then need some shelter trailers, well, then they would have that facility, I guess. But as I said before, I think it's more likely that it would be used by people bringing dogs or cycling.
Thank you. Anybody, any other questions? Lovely. No, thank you very much indeed. I want you to be kind of just to pop your microphone back down again. Yeah, thank you, if you would. Thank you very much. Right. Yes, we have Councillor Ratcliffe is the ward member. Did you wish to speak as ward member?
Yes, just briefly to introduce. I'll go to the lectern if that's. Thank you, Chair. Very simply, I called this application in following different opinions regarding the interpretation of the joint local plan. I have found the statements of both the officer and the agent informative, and I really look forward to the debate and members' thoughts on this application. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Does any members have any questions for the board member? Yeah, Councillor Noyes.
How much holiday accommodation is there around Exmoor?
I find that difficult to answer. I know, I know of one, and probably a further one. I know some in adjoining villages which are there, but I really couldn't give a detailed answer to that, unfortunately.
Anybody else? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I do have one further question, just for the, well, I'm not sure it's the planning officer, Ms. Anderson Smith, actually. I would like to just unpick a little bit more around the planning history of that older application, which the conditions of it do say that it is for the applicant rather than the land, which I think is very unusual because of the applicant's circumstances. That the original applicant, sorry, it's not the same applicant, just for the avoidance of doubt, and that it does state that it needs to be removed if within a 10-year period from construction, the agricultural use of the business ceases, and that's right, permission is for the benefit of the applicant only, not for the benefit of the land due to the applicant's special circumstances. There wasn't any more information on the planning portal, so I really wanted to unpick a little bit as to what that actually means in real terms. Are we looking at here, because even though it's been come forward as a change of use, so what are we looking at in terms of if that is actually, what the impact of that is?
So, assuming as suggested in the application form, the land has changed hands, yes, it would suggest that the current status of the development of the site is unauthorised. But there's a question about whether it's expedient to take any enforcement action on that as currently stands, and that would have to be looked at dependent on the outcome of discussions today. The current application is for a change of use of the land and the conversion of the existing building on site. So unless Anna disagrees, I would suggest that this application, if approved, could regularise development which is on site as is.
Thank you. Did you wish to add anything further on things?
Only that Anna doesn't disagree. I would agree with the officer that if this were approved at committee today, this would start a new chapter essentially in the history of the application's life and would regularise the situation on site.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I'll give this to Devon. I don't think there's any further to add.
I think I am mulling it over. I'm not sure about the status of the actual building itself, but in terms of whether it then it is expedient to take enforcement action, having agreed the conversion and a change of use of that building, I think it probably it would not be expedient. So I think the status of the building would be a bit grey, but the actual whether we take enforcement action, I think, would be quite clear.
Okay, so essentially, if this was if we were to go against officer recommendation today, essentially what I'm understanding is then this would start, as Henson Smith said, a new phase in the building, and we'd be starting with a clean slate, essentially.
Essentially, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Members, do you have any more questions, or Councillor Moyes?
Do we know the current situation with holiday accommodation? There seem to be an awful lot of applications coming in to change things, and I felt that we were getting a bit too much holiday accommodation, which would obviously reduce the income of people who've been doing it for some time. But do you have any ideas on that? Sorry.
I can say that on the portal, I think it's on their business plan, that there is a list of other holiday lets around the area is included on the applicants.
Yeah, I mean West Devon generally, really.
Right, I'm not sure that's necessarily relevant to this application. That is one I think that probably might be useful information for the wider membership to have anyway. But I don't think it's necessarily relevant to the determining of this application. Okay, because obviously businesses can compete. It's a business decision that they need to make. Councillor Fitz, did you have a question?
Yes, I have, Chairman. I just wondered if we could have a map of the site up again, because I wondered how close the two listed buildings are to the development, whether they are actually within the village of Exbourne or whether they're on the outskirts. Are you able to indicate whether the listed buildings are, officer, please?
I can't exactly, I'm afraid. I did look at this. I first received the application and I had no concerns at all over the potential for this to affect their setting or have any impact on them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? Councillor Spetting.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify then in lay terms, if the committee were to approve the application today, we would be approving for the conversion of this building, which if it wasn't being converted, there would be a question mark over whether it should be there at all. Yes. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
But don't forget that doesn't make a difference in terms of when we're looking at a retrospective, for instance. It's still treated exactly the same. For me, I just wanted to get an understanding where it's at in the planning history and what that meant. Okay.
Understood. Thank you, Chair.
So I hope that makes sense. Mr. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you don't mind if I just respond to a couple of the points in precedence that the agent raised in terms of comparable sites. There were two sites which were mentioned. One was relating to the change of use of a salvage yard and its use for holiday accommodation, and another related to the Countryman Inn. and one of them was granted at appeal. The other's still being determined at the moment. There's no final recommendation on it. But what I would like to say is that the existing use of land is very important in weighing up this application. This land is in agricultural use. There is very little existing traffic. The intensity of use is very light. So the change therefore can be quite significant. The other two examples, one of which related to a pub, another related to a salvage yard, they're existing businesses. There's a lot of associated traffic associated with them already, and they were arguments that were put forward for those applications. And in the case of the salvage yard, yes, in a similar unsustainable location, but they submitted a transport assessment to demonstrate the existing traffic on the site. And so each case does need to be decided on its own merits.
Thank you. Any further questions, members? Okay, so to take this forward, then I will move the recommendation as laid out on page 17, which is for refusal, and the reasons are as described. Page 18 and the policies there are as well. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chairman.
Okay, members, we are in debate. Councillor Mott.
Thank you. I'm happy to kick this one off, Chair. I am in full support of the officer recommendation to refuse this application in that I cannot see it as although it is an existing building, it is a temporary structure in that it is a wooden structure, it is a stable, and it is therefore effectively, even though it's for holiday accommodation, construction within the open countryside, which we would not allow without substantial reason for any other dwelling. So I am therefore going to go with the officer recommendation of refusal.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chairman. What we have been shown here is a wooden stable, the applicant wishes to be converted to holiday accommodation. I have major concerns about this because what will be required under building regulations for conversion will bring forward a significantly different structure to what is there now. And it does concern me that we are allowing, or would be if it was approved, allowing something which would not fit in with the open countryside. Although it said it's close to the village, it's a quarter of a mile away in my reckoning. 300-400 metres, a quarter of a mile away in Old Money. And I do feel that with what we would end up with here, the structure that would be here for holiday accommodation would be a lot different to what we're seeing now, what being presented with. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Just to pitch in, I too will be supporting the officer's recommendation. I think for me, the whole thing hinges on the word suitable location. It might be a suitable location for a stable. It's not a suitable location for a holiday accommodation.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm conscious that the reasons are described in the officer's report, which is possibly why people aren't verbalising. Okay, so I will then take this to the vote. So all those in favour of the officer's recommendation, which is for refusal, please show.
That's 8 in favour.
Thank you, and I believe we have one abstention.
You do indeed.
Yeah, one abstention. Okay. So that is refused. So thank you very much indeed for your time, okay, and for your contribution. At request, we will have just a 10-minute comfort break for a few relief on everybody's face. We will go by the clock that's up there because I know we're all slightly different, and it's just gone 25 to. So can we restart here at 10 to 12, please, promptly? Lovely. Thank you very much. welcome back, everybody. Two members haven't joined us because they've declared the interest and have therefore left the room. So we are on our last application of the morning, just asking Matty, which is 1861/21 CAC, which is the Old Mill site in Oakhampton. The case officer who has prepared the report is unable to be with us this morning, so Ms Henderson Smith has very kindly offered to present the report. We also have Mr Lawrence here as the conservation officer as well, and I will probably be inviting him to make comments as well. Okay, so over to you, Ms Henderson Smith.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you members is for permission to demolish a set of buildings in the centre of Oakhampton. They are redundant buildings within Oakhampton Conservation Area. Many of you will know this site, for those of you who don't. All right, this is the college built here where the red blob is. This is Mill Road, this junction just here before the bridge, which is just to the left of the red spot. If you went directly south from there, would take you into the car park for Simmons Park. So the building itself, sorry, there's a bit of lag time here. The building itself is not listed, but it is considered to be a positive building within the conservation area and a non-designated heritage asset. What is listed is the chimney. You can see denoted by CHY there on the plan before you. That's grade 2 listed, the grade 2 listed chimney, which many of you will know. So the report in front of you members details the policy direction regarding demolition of positive buildings within the conservation area. As an update, the batteries building, which is referred to within the report, has been approved and is now well under construction on site, and has been for the last week or so. So as a correction or an update to the report, I just want to be very clear. There's a reference several times within the report to dangerous buildings notice. No formal dangerous buildings notice has been served on this site. However, and that's been confirmed by Devon Building Control. However, the reason that it hasn't been served is because, quite akin to the way we approach enforcement notices, they only serve a notice if it's absolutely required and necessary. They've identified that there are concerns with these buildings, that they are potentially dangerous structures, and that the remediation needed is demolition or shoring up of the end gable to the west. They've identified that issue, but because there is an application before planning to potentially rectify that issue, and there have been previously, and the owner is looking to try and demolish and therefore provide one of the solutions that building control have suggested, it isn't considered sort of expedient by building control to therefore serve the notice. As I say, very akin to the approach we take with enforcement. If there's something on the route that might rectify the problem, we don't go into heavy-handed. And that's essentially what building control have done. So the issue has been identified, but a formal notice has not been served. So apology if the report's got an error or is misleading, but that's the situation. The only update other than that is that the bat licence that's referred to, there's a condition recommending that we would want to see sight of the bat licence because there are bats using the buildings that are proposed for demolition. There's a condition recommending that we would want to see that. As an update, since the report was written, that bat licence has now been achieved with from Natural England, and as such, condition 5 would need altering. Just to state that the work should be carried out in accordance with the licence, rather than asking for the licence to be achieved and us seeing it. So minor change there, but that's just a slight change in circumstance. This report is very comprehensive and does set out the competing issues regarding the circumstances of the site, its town centre location, potential harm to the public, but then the benefits that the building has at the moment, and the policy situation in terms of the MPPF and our SPD and policy guidance around demolition of heritage buildings. So I won't rehearse those issues. They are set out in a lot of detail within the report. So or we'll just take you through the plans and the photographs for those who are less familiar with the site. So that's the site in the centre of Oakhampton. As you can see there, the buildings will be demolished. In addition, actually, I should have said to the listed chimney, there is the listed bridge just to the west of the site. And Oakhampton Mill, actually, to the right of the site, to the east of the site, on the other side of Mill Road. So you can see here, hopefully, the buildings of the areas to be demolished. The chimney remains along with what would essentially end up being two buttress sections of wall. There isn't a concern, or we've been advised there isn't a concern about the structural integrity of the chimney, but in order to just play it safe, for want of a better way of putting it, two sections of wall that are attached to the chimney are proposed to be retained. For those of you who don't know the site, that's the site from the east, essentially back to Mill Road or Mill Road car park, looking down towards the river. You can obviously see the chimney, and these are the buildings, or some of the buildings proposed for demolition. Again, that's quite literally from the edge of Mill Road, looking down towards the large trees you can see in the background there, littered with nests actually, is the trees that run around the edge of Simmons Park. There, the buildings proposed for demolition, that is looking towards Mill Road with your back to the river. And here with your back to the park, or where, for those of you who know where the pedestrian crossing is, this is from the southerly side of the pedestrian crossing. The main area considered to be at most risk of failure is where the red dot is, or that gable. As you can see, and for quite some time, that's been Harris fenced off. So there's, you can't see in this picture, that comes out quite a long way into what is a pedestrian route around the back of this building, back out onto Mill Road, because there's no pavement on this section of Mill Road here. Again, just a section of the building, and there's that gable end more closely. I didn't go inside the Harris fencing to take that, but my hand did, just to point that out. But you can see the layperson, there's quite some significant cracking on there. And just to view in context, that's the listed bridge, looking back towards that gable end, and the chimney obviously looking over the upland there. Apologies for that. So essentially, as I say, the competing issues are set out in quite some detail in the report. So as such, the recommendation is per page 25 of the agenda for conditional approval, with the aforementioned change to condition 5, with a change to it being in compliance with the Natural England Protected Species Licence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Condition 6, which says no extra compensatory back routes provided. Did you say this is now being built out?
That condition needs to remain, please, Chair. It is under construction and it's got quite a considerable way along since the report was written, but it still needs to be completed and retained.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to check that. Mr. Lawrence, did you wish to make any comments on this? Because I'm very much aware that Natural England have put a strong objection in, which is carrying significant weight. Historic England, sorry, I say, Natural England, sorry, Historic England, which does carry significant weight. I wondered if you wanted to add anything in here.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just very quickly and briefly summarise the long history behind this site. It's some 12 years since we were negotiating a scheme for an alternative redevelopment. At that time, the group of buildings were proposed for spot listing to Historic England, and the response at the time was that whilst they had some local interest, they weren't worthy of statutory designation. So on that basis, we do consider them to be non-designated heritage assets because they are a positive historic group of buildings within the conservation area. It has, however, been accepted for quite a long time that, you know, demolition of most, if not all, of the structures apart from the chimney was unfortunately going to happen at some point. The two provisos to that has always been firstly, the reclamation and reuse of as much of the historic stone material as possible to bed any new development into the conservation area, and to provide something that preserved or enhanced the conservation area and the setting of the listed chimney. The other proviso, and this is the key point from Historic England's point of view, is that paragraph 204 of the National Planning Policy Framework requires us as a local planning authority to try not to allow demolition of heritage assets unless all reasonable steps have been taken to secure an adequate replacement. And that is the crux of the Historic England concern, is the absence of a scheme at all, let alone one definitely being in the pipeline. So the risk, to summarise really from their point of view, and one which I must share, is that we could face a site which has basically got a few piles of rubble, maybe some dwarf remnants of wall, we don't know, because that isn't detailed in the application, surrounded by Harris fencing for an unknown period of time going forward. So, yeah, I think in summary, it's not so much the principle of losing the buildings, it's the absence of a planning application for their replacement is the Historic England concern.
Thank you. So if there had been an alternative provision coming forward, that would have given officers confidence that that would have proceeded. Obviously, it would have still need to go through the planning process, but there wouldn't be such a strong objection to the demolition. Am I correct?
It's a two-stage process. First of all, to have something in place, an approval, but also to have a time frame for that being delivered. And that's what the NPPF says we should try to do, ideally. So we are stepping outside of the NPPF and what is echoed in our own SPD as well.
Thank you. Questions, members? Councillor Moyes.
Yeah, I don't know this site very well, but I drove past it on Sunday and I didn't notice that building, but there's some other, whether they were further back, they looked in reasonable condition. Yeah, perhaps I was looking at the dance, that going back further. Yeah, that one. And I'm a bit surprised that the owners of the site didn't rectify any damage that was there. Any comments, please?
Who would like to take that one?
No, I'm happy to take it, Chair. I mean, I can't really comment on the actions of the current owners of the site in terms of rectifying the issues. I mean, you could take the view that they are looking to do that. You know, as I say, the building control route for addressing the danger aspect is either to shore up that end wall or to demolish. And we have this application in front of us. Historically, I can't really comment on why works have or haven't been done either with the current owner or the previous.
Councillor Pearce, Cheetham, then Spettigue.
Has there been an indication of any plans coming forward for the site, you know, for future development?
As far as I'm aware, we have no formal pre-application. We have no formal application on the table, and we have no formal pre-application discussion with regards to a replacement building on the site.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, how do we, if we were to refuse this application and the end wall was, that gable end was to collapse and onto somebody's car or whatever as they driving by, how would the authorities stand legally on that? Or would it be the responsibility of the owners?
Jim, that does sound like it might be a question coming my way. The building control and the building act scheme is completely separate from the planning considerations. So if the building were to fall down and we'd failed to take action, then I don't think that
we would have any liability for that, because ultimately we've said to the owners, you are the owner of the building. You can either demolish this or you can shore it up. And so therefore they have an alternative, they have a choice. At the present time, they decided they will look to demolish this building. That's their choice. If in the meantime it falls down, that is their responsibility. It is not the local authority's responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's not to say, of course, that we don't want that to happen, because we certainly don't want anybody to be injured. Councillor Cheadle, then Councillor Spettigan.
Thank you. Yes, my question is very similar to Councillor Pearson's. Really, just wanted to walk through the sequence of events. Were we to refuse this application on the basis that there was no proposal on what might replace it, were it to be demolished? That's the thrust of your argument. So were we to refuse it, if it's a view that it could be dangerous, presumably building control would be asked to go and inspect it or look at it or come to the conclusion of whether it is dangerous or not.
Shall I take that?
And then if it was dangerous, the owners would have some responsibility to do something to safeguard the public. Have I got that sort of sequence of logic right?
Mr. Lawrence, I think it might be helpful for members to have an explanation as well regarding whether the safety of the building is material. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I have been in discussion with the building control officer, and as Anna's rightly said, a range of possible actions have been identified. They are securing the gable end by shoring it up, securing the safety of the public by closing the public footpath temporarily, which goes across the footbridge, and people can go to alternative ways around to avoid that gable end, which is the part of the building which is considered to be of the greatest concern. The structural report which the applicants have put in does refer to deterioration of the site as a whole, and nobody would argue that that isn't the case, but that then also brings into question I can't remember which paragraph number it is in the MPPF, which says that we shouldn't take neglect of a building into consideration when judging a planning application. So we do tend to go around in a bit of a circle there, but as it stands, the Devon Building Control Partnership have looked at the building. At least two different officers have looked at the building. They consider the gable to be dangerous. They consider the building to be a danger to public if they trespass on the site. But demolition is only one option, and it relates just to this gable. The problem is, if you start taking down a gable, you then put other parts of the building under stress and cause the danger to a domino effect along. And I think that's the argument that the applicants are making, is that, you know, if you take down that gable end, you may as well take down the whole lot. But to be quite clear, building control are saying that there are other alternatives, as I say, shoring up the gable end to make sure it doesn't fall, and closing off the public right of way and increasing the Harris fencing that's already on site to keep people away from the structure should it unfortunately collapse. Obviously, we don't want any public dangers to occur, and Devon Building Control Partnership are very much on the ball with that. Hope that helps.
I'm still just a tiny bit confused on the logic. Were we to refuse the permission to demolish it today, which is the application in front of us, not the chimney, I'm talking about the bits that are in the application, the next thing that would happen would be Devon Building Control serve some notice on the building that something must be done other than demolition, because demolition has been refused by the planning permission. And then the owners of the building would be obliged to make the building safe. Have I got that right?
I'm not sure it's 100% right, because it's outside the planning. Mr. Devon, did you want to take this bit?
I think in essence, Councillor Cheadle, you're right. If the permission is refused today,
then one of the reasons, I think, from what I understand from planning colleagues, why no formal action has been taken by the Building Control Partnership is that there is this potential that permission will be granted for the demolition of the building, of the part of the building, which will then remove the danger. If that doesn't occur, or in the application is refused, then I can't really speak for the Building Control Partnership, but I would imagine that there would then be a further series of conversations, which might well then mean formal notice is served, because the applicant hasn't necessarily moved forward with the alternatives of putting the building right, shoring up the building, etc. And there's no other prospect of anything coming forward that might change circumstances. So it's potentially a formal notice, I suspect, it might follow if the applicant then decide not to shore up the building. Does that help, or have I not filled the gap?
Yes, it helps. Obvious.
Okay, my apologies. I think I misunderstood your question, actually. I thought you were referring it in terms of the planning application. Councillor Spettigue.
Thank you, Chair. So just to kind of candidly summarise this building's fate, it's in a bit of a catch-22, really, isn't it? We either give permission for it to be demolished, or parts of it at least, or we don't, and the owner who, if they choose not to invest in supporting the building in its current, maintained condition, allows it to become unsafe, then it goes to building control, who then, one of the options is to have it demolished, and that basically is, isn't it? I mean, if you look, if we refuse permission to demolish the structure, then arguably it could still end up being demolished on safety grounds. Is that right?
Through you, Chair, if I may. As my colleagues pointed out, there are alternatives to demolition to make it safe. It could be shored up. That is one option building control are tabling. So there's that as an option on the table for the owners. It's not the one they're exploring at the moment, but it is there. If your line of thought carries through, there is also the other option that this is made safe in the interim through something such as shoring it up, and then an application comes back to the authority for demolition, but with a sister application for a replacement structure, which would then be considered on its merits and whether it was a suitable replacement building. That is another way that it could play out. That answer the question?
That does make sense. Can I take one on the end? So, any suggestions building control make to the owners? I mean, it's all any suggestions made to the owners are the owner's discretion to whether or not to follow them up, aren't they? Is that right? On the basis that it's not a listed building. So,
on the basis that formal notice hasn't been served at this point, the advice is just advice as to the options. My understanding is if a formal notice is served, then that's a different situation.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope that's kind of clarifying the position with regard to it would need to be a completely separate thing. Councillor Southcott, then Councillor Radcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. There's several things that strike me about the whole thing. One, the plan to replace it isn't there, right? But if they demolish it, what's going to happen to all the material? Is it just going to be left there on a big pile?
The report actually does say that it will be stored off-site, yes.
Stored off-site?
Yes, it's, I don't know consensus.
And there doesn't seem to be anything in the way of tidying the site up, landscaping it at all, to leave it in a tidy state. There seems to be nothing mentioned about that.
Again, I think it's in the report, but
so, as the Chair has pointed out, there is a loose scheme for how the material is dealt with, and that's tied down through the recommended condition number 8 about the recycling and salvage as a strategy for that. With regards to the site, once any demolition was complete, you're quite right, there isn't a landscaping condition, as my colleague has pointed out at the beginning of this. So if members wanted to move the recommendation on the table subject to an additional condition or landscaping strategy in case the site were then to sit vacant for quite some time, I'd be in support of that.
Right. I looked at this chimney recently, and I've seen plants growing out of it. So, what maintenance? How secure is that chimney itself? In the, you know, once the other buildings are removed, is the chimney still going to be integrally safe?
Thanks, Chair. Those questions that we have asked and the reassurances we've been given is that it's been looked at by a professional surveyor who's done an engineering report. As Anna said at the beginning, there's also the intention that a minimum of 2 metres of walling either side for the attached building, which you can see with the partially rusted corrugated iron roof, that will be left intact, at least for the time being, so that there's no disturbance of the chimney. But the chimney has been looked at a couple of years ago, and then again within the last few months, with no signs of further deterioration.
Okay, do you have another supplemental?
Yes.
Yeah.
The last thing that sort of comes to mind is the timescale between doing all this. There needs to sort of be some sort of condition like that. The site is really left very tidy at the end of the demolition. As I say, the landscaping is important. It is a you know, outstanding place there near Simmons Park, and it could look bloody awful, to be quite honest, if it's not done with a degree of care and attention.
Is that a question in there, Councillor Stafford? We are in questions.
I suppose, yes. Is the site going to be left clear and tidy, safe?
Through you, Chair, a landscaping condition could detail not only how the site is left at the end of it, but also have a time frame to that. So within X amount of months of the commencement of demolition, for example, the skin is put in, and that it's completed within a certain period of time following the completion of demolition. So we can secure that. The council has other powers for very untidy sites, but I would maintain in this situation that a landscaping condition that has triggers for when that landscaping scheme comes in and when the landscaping itself, the landscaping would include tidying the site essentially, and how the surfaces are left and how any material is left, a sort of endpoint to the implementation and completion of that landscaping scheme could sit within that landscaping scheme. So I think the concerns you've got could be covered by an additional condition, sort of generically called landscaping, but actually what you're talking about is the site and how it looks on completion of demolition.
Councillor Ratcliffe and Councillor Moyes.
Thank you, Chair. The question I have really is contamination, not perhaps of buildings, but of the soil and the subsoil on this site. I know there's been lots of schemes over the last 10, 15 years for developing this site, and one of the stumbling blocks has been contamination of what is in the ground. And my question is, has the applicant made or had a professional soil analysis carried out as to what we have there? Because indirectly this could affect any landscaping scheme which is possibly going to be proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. The documentation, I'm afraid I can't comment on exactly which supporting documents came in with the application at this time. What I can say is that our environmental health officers have been consulted on the submission, and they have said, off moving to page 28, that there's no objection subject to construction environmental management plan condition, which you'll see is listed under condition 2 of the recommended conditions. That would normally detail for above land works like this, that would normally detail any additional issues around unsuspected or unexpected contamination. My understanding is that you wouldn't be looking at earthworks with this site. I take your point that if if you looked at a landscaping scheme, you could find that if you wanted to put in some more permanent longer term landscaping, like a tree, for example, that obviously the standard of the soil, which I agree with you, has been previously identified as having levels of contamination, would be a problem. If that came forward and the details weren't there, they would need to be provided with the landscaping scheme, and if the soil were unsuitable for any such planting, then a tree pit or suitable soil to support that would have to go in. What I would expect in reality to come in for any kind of landscaping scheme, if an alternative proposal scheme didn't come in and this site were to be left vacant, would be that it would be predominantly hard landscaping, and that any planting would probably take place above the current ground level, in planters rather than into the ground itself, because that brings another layer of issues with it. But I would expect the site to be tidied and if anything, hard landscaped.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
I could just add a little point to that as well. The written scheme of investigation from an archaeological point of view for the site identifies the need, first of all, for historic building recording of buildings above ground level. But because this is known to have been a mill site since medieval times, at any time that there was going to be ground disturbance, there would then be a need for archaeological observation and recording of those ground layers. So I would assume that the intention would be to leave a tidy site without disturbance of ground for the time being, and then contamination and archaeology would be done almost as a single synchronised exercise when a development proposal has been agreed.
Thank you.
Councillor Moyes, sorry.
Yeah, that photograph of the chimney, it looks as if it's leaning. Is that true, or is it just the way the photograph was taken? And is that why the owners want to have keep some of that wall to almost prop it up?
I can't really comment on whether that's leaning or not. I took that with my camera with my arm through a fence, so I wouldn't pay too much credence to how it necessarily looks in that image. Yeah, I was sober at the time. It wasn't me leaning, just to be clear about that. But as I say, I wouldn't give too much credence to that. It was taken on a camera phone. And as I say, the intention is to retain that chimney. This does not cover the chimney.
Anybody else, any other questions for them? Councillor Slacker.
How concerned is the environmental, historical people concerned about the lack of what's going to replace this building? Is there any real concern over that at all?
As for you, Chair, I mean, we obviously just had some considerable discussion about from our conservation specialist, and on page 28 of your report, you'll see the comment from Historic England. They continue to raise concern, tantamount to an objection, about the lack of a replacement, which is something that Mr. Lawrence just detailed about, how our policy in the NPPF encourages that.
Any more questions? Okay, we don't have any registered speakers for this application, but I'm the ward member who called it in. I don't have a great deal to say, simply because the reason for calling, I think, is clear on the description, is that I called it in on the grounds the building is a non-designated heritage asset, and there is no sister application for what will replace it, which is what I identified myself when I was reading through the report originally, and I can see that there's a real planning balance here. So I'm not going to say anything more as the ward member, reserving comment for debate. But there again, I suppose people want to ask me any questions of the ward member, feel free. No? Okay, right. Moving swiftly on. Right, so if there are no more questions then for the officers for a minute, then I will move the recommendation as laid out on page 25, which is for conditional approval, with the conditions as described, with the amendments suggested by Ms. Simpson-Smith, i.e. the works to be carried out in accordance with the back licence, which is the better wording for it, and also with a landscaping strategy. Do members want to include if members want to include a timeframe for that, then perhaps that can be put that debate element. Is there a seconder for that, please?
I'll be the second, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. We are in debate, members. Who wishes to go first? Right, hold on a minute. Right, Councillor Pearce, you first. Can you pop your hands up again, please, so I can see you all?
Thank you, Chairman. I have real concerns about this application. In fact, major concerns. When you read the report, the applicant's surveyor first surveyed the site 3 years ago, and then took further surveys last year, a year ago. Now, I find it very disappointing and quite alarming that there's been no pre-application advice sought with our planning team as to what might go on here to replace these buildings if they're demolished. Now, 3 years is ample time for some discussions with our planning officers and with our heritage officer in the way forward. And my concerns are that we're going to be going against Historic England's concerns and also the MPPF Article 204, which advises that there should be redevelopment plans coming forward for any demolition. If we refuse this today, this application, and the Devon Building Control Partnership will issue a formal notice to the applicants, but there are a number of options given. And my concern is that the gable end of the